Serafina Beaumont commanded the boardroom with the serene, lethal poise of a queen surveying her domain. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the tension in the room, each word precisely chosen, each directive backed by an unassailable logic that left her senior executives scrambling to keep up. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal gray suit that spoke of quiet power rather than overt wealth, she was the architect of a global empire, Beaumont Industries. From this glass-walled sanctuary high above the city, she orchestrated billion-dollar deals and dismantled corporate rivals with a strategist's mind and a surgeon's precision. Her expression was a carefully cultivated mask of neutrality, revealing nothing of the complex double life she would return to at the end of the day. The meeting concluded, her final decision delivered, leaving no room for debate. Her executives, a collection of the sharpest minds in the industry, filed out of the room with a mixture of fear and profound respect. Alone, Serafina allowed a flicker of weariness to cross her features. She walked to the panoramic window, gazing down at the sprawling city below. It was a world of power and privilege, a world that was hers to command. Yet for the past 2 years, she had willingly chosen to inhabit a tiny, forgotten corner of it, a life so different from this one that the daily transition gave her a peculiar sense of vertigo. This deception, this elaborate test, had started as a necessity, but it was slowly becoming her prison. Her transformation began in a private, sterile chamber hidden behind her executive office. The formidable CEO, Serafina Beaumont, was methodically erased. The tailored suit was replaced with a faded navy blue polo shirt and worn cargo pants, the uniform of a city courier service. The delicate leather heels were swapped for scuffed, practical work boots. She wiped off her subtle professional makeup and coiled her elegant auburn hair into a tight, severe bun, tucking it under a generic baseball cap. The final piece was the set of keys to a battered delivery scooter. Looking at her reflection in the polished chrome of the elevator, she saw not a titan of industry, but Sarah, a woman weary from a long day, a face that would blend into any crowd, utterly forgettable. The scooter ride home was a jarring descent from the stratosphere of corporate power to the gritty reality of the city streets. The sleek, silent luxury of her private car was replaced by the roar of traffic and the smell of exhaust fumes. She navigated the congested avenues not as their owner, but as just another worker bee in the vast, sprawling hive. Her destination was a small, cramped apartment in a rundown neighborhood, a place so far removed from her penthouse that it might as well have been in another country. This humble apartment, with its peeling paint and noisy neighbors, was the stage for her grand experiment, the laboratory where she dissected the nature of love and loyalty. The moment she opened the door, a warm, familiar presence enveloped her, a comforting balm against the harshness of the outside world and the coldness of her other life. Liam Vance, her husband, looked up from the sketchbook where he had been, lost his face, immediately breaking into a gentle, loving smile. He was a man of quiet intensity with kind eyes and a way of moving that was both languid and graceful. "You're back," he said, his voice soft. He took the delivery bag from her hands and began rubbing the tension from her shoulders. "Tough day." In these moments, Serafina felt the immense weight of her deception. His touch was real, his concern genuine. This love, she believed, was the one true thing in her life. This fragile peace was shattered by a sharp, disdainful voice from the kitchen. Is she finally home? The whole apartment stinks of grease and street fumes the moment she walks in. Eleanor Vance, Liam's mother, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron, her face a mask of perpetual disapproval. She was a woman who felt cheated by life, and she had decided her daughter-in-law was the primary cause of her misfortune. Her eyes swept over Sarah's uniform with undisguised contempt. "Look at you. Filthy. My Liam could have been a great man, a respected man. Instead, he is shackled to a delivery girl who can barely pay the rent." The nightly ritual of dinner was an exercise in emotional endurance for Serafina. She would serve the simple food she had picked up on her way home, and Eleanor would find fault with every dish. Tonight was no exception. "Is this all you can afford? My son needs proper nutrition, not this peasant food," she sneered, pushing a piece of chicken around her plate. She then turned her attention to Liam, her tone shifting to one of cloying adoration. "You look tired, my dear boy. Wasting your artistic talents in this hovel. You should be in a gallery celebrated. If only you had married a woman who could support your dreams instead of one who drags you down with her." Liam, to his credit, always defended her. "Mother, that's enough," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Sarah works harder than anyone I know. We are a team, please stop." But his words were like water on stone. Eleanor would simply scoff and continue her litany of complaints, a toxic monologue on their poverty, Sierra's failings, and Liam's wasted potential. Serafina would sit in silence, her food tasteless in her mouth, her carefully constructed composure the only thing preventing her from screaming. She could buy this entire building with the loose change in her real bank account. She could ruin Eleanor with a single phone call. But she couldn't. She was Sarah the pauper, and she had to endure it. This charade had a purpose. Serafina had met and married Liam in a whirlwind romance just before her grandfather's death, had unexpectedly thrust her into the role of CEO of Beaumont Industries. Terrified that her newfound immense wealth would poison the simple, genuine love they shared, she had concocted this plan. She told Liam her inheritance was modest, just enough to get by, and that she needed to work as a courier to make ends meet. It was a test she needed to know with absolute certainty that he loved her Sarah and not the fortune she commanded. For 2 years, she had watched and waited. But Eleanor's constant venomous tirades combined with Liam's seeming contentment to live a simple life while she worked had planted a seed of doubt. It was a poisonous weed in the garden of her heart. Was his gentle nature a sign of his pure character? Or was it a mask for a lack of ambition, a willingness to be a freeloader? Did he defend her out of true love? Or was it simply easier than confronting his overbearing mother? The questions haunted her, chipping away at her resolve. The love she felt for him was a powerful, undeniable force, but the uncertainty was an acid slowly dissolving the foundations of her trust. Later that night, as she lay in their small bed, the sounds of the city a distant lullaby, she watched Liam sleep. His face, so peaceful in repose, was the face of the man she had fallen in love with, the man who made her feel safe and cherished. Her hand rested on his chest, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart. The love was real. She could feel it. But was it strong enough to withstand true hardship? Was it unconditional? The doubt was a cold knot in her stomach. She knew with a sinking feeling of dread that the time for quiet observation was over. She had to force the issue. She had to know the truth once and for all, no matter the cost. The quiet weekend mornings were Serafina's sanctuary, the only time the crushing weight of her dual existence seemed to lift. In the soft light that filtered through their small apartment window, the roles of CEO and courier would melt away, leaving only Sarah, a woman in love. Liam would often sit across their tiny table, his sketchbook open as charcoal pencil, flying across the page as he captured her in a moment of repose. He didn't draw the powerful titan of industry or the weary worker. He drew the essence of the woman he saw, the quiet strength in her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile. This morning he was particularly excited, showing her a small check from a local magazine that had bought one of his illustrations. It was a meager sum, but his pride was immense. "It's a start, Sarah." For us, he'd said, his sincerity, a warm glow in the small room. It was in these moments that her doubts would recede. How could a man who found such joy in a small, shared victory be the freeloader his mother painted him to be? His love felt as real and tangible as the warm mug of coffee in her hands. He was her anchor, the calm center in the hurricane of her life. She found herself clinging to these peaceful interludes, hoarding them like precious jewels, a fortification against the inevitable storm that was his mother. The storm, as always, arrived without warning, cloaked in a syrupy, false sweetness that was more alarming than her usual bitterness. "I've invited an old friend over for tea this afternoon," Eleanor announced, bustling into the living room. "Clara Covington. Her daughter Chloe will be coming as well. They're such a wonderful family, so successful." She didn't look at Sarah as she spoke, instead focusing on straightening a picture frame that was already perfectly aligned. The calculated casualness of her tone was a blaring alarm bell in Serafina's mind. Liam, ever the optimist, simply nodded. "That's nice, Mom. It will be good for you to see your friends." Serafina, however, knew this was no friendly visit. It was a strategic maneuver, and she was the target. She spent the next few hours with a growing sense of dread, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. The Covingtons arrived precisely at 2, sweeping into the small apartment like royalty visiting the slums. Clara Covington was a woman sculpted by wealth and condescension, her designer dress looking garishly out of place against their worn furniture. Her daughter Chloe was a younger, sharper version of her mother, her eyes scanning their home with a barely concealed sneer. They presented a stark, brutal contrast to Sarah, who stood beside Liam in her simple jeans and t-shirt, feeling like a ghost at a feast. Eleanor, however, was in her element, preening and fawning over her guests, her voice several octaves higher than usual. The conversation, orchestrated with malicious precision by Eleanor, was a slow, agonizing dissection of Sarah's perceived inadequacies. Sarah works as a city courier, Eleanor would announce with a sigh, as if confessing a shameful disease. It's such honest work, of course, but it leaves her so tired. Clara Covington would nod sagely. Of course. A woman's constitution isn't meant for such things. My Chloe is an interior designer. She has such a flair for creating beautiful spaces. Chloe would then offer a pitying smile. It must be so difficult living like this. I can't even imagine. Every word was a carefully aimed dart designed to isolate and humiliate Serafina. Liam was visibly uncomfortable, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. He repeatedly tried to steer the conversation to other topics, but Eleanor would expertly guide it back to her chosen theme, Liam's brilliance and the tragedy of his current circumstances. The cruelty reached its apex when Eleanor turned to Liam, her eyes gleaming. You know Liam, Chloe's father, owns one of the most prestigious art galleries in the city. He could make your career overnight. A man of your talent shouldn't be hidden away. Imagine the life you could have surrounded by beauty and culture, with a wife who understands your world. The suggestion was so blatant, so audacious, it sucked the air out of the room. She was openly trying to replace her son's wife right in front of her. That was the breaking point. Liam stood up, his usual gentleness replaced by a cold fury. Mother, that is enough, he said, his voice low and shaking. I am a married man. I love my wife. Mrs. Covington. Chloe, it was a pleasure to meet you, but I believe this visit is over. He walked over to Sarah and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring, a public declaration of his allegiance. The Covingtons, shocked at this breach of decorum, gathered their things and left in a huff of offended dignity. The air in the apartment was thick with the aftermath of the explosion, charged with resentment and unspoken words. After his mother had retreated to her room, slamming the door behind her, Liam turned to Sarah, his face etched with apology and anger. I am so sorry, Sarah. I never should have let them in. But Serafina was barely listening. His defense of her had been a balm to her wounded pride. But the audacity of his mother's scheme had crystallized a cold, hard resolve within her. A quiet defense was no longer enough. She had to know what he would do when faced not with social embarrassment but with true, desperate hardship. She had to know if his love was a fortress that could withstand a siege or a simple fence that would collapse under real pressure. The test was no longer a vague concept, a distant contingency. It was now a fully formed plan, a necessary campaign she would launch to secure her future. She would strip away their financial security, their only safety net, which was her own fabricated, meager income. She would plunge them into a crisis so real, so terrifying, that their true characters would be laid bare. It was a cruel and manipulative act, and a part of her recoiled at the thought of the pain she was about to inflict on the man she loved. But the part of her that was a CEO, a strategist who dealt in risk and outcomes, knew it was the only way. That evening, as Liam tried to comfort her, his arms wrapped around her, his voice a soothing murmur, she felt a profound and terrible sense of detachment. He was consoling her for a wound. He had no idea she was about to deepen into a chasm. He saw her as a victim, never suspecting she was about to become the architect of their shared misery. She leaned into his embrace, her face buried in his shoulder, a silent apology on her lips. The time for passive observation was over. The time for hoping and doubting was done. She would get her answer. She would start the fire herself, just to see what, if anything, was fireproof. The day Serafina chose to lose her job was a masterpiece of calculated deception. She didn't spend it on her delivery scooter. Instead, she was in her penthouse office at Beaumont Industries, a silent, minimalist space that contrasted sharply with the chaotic life she feigned. With her loyal assistant Anya, she orchestrated the final details of the charade. Transfer the last paycheck, she instructed, her voice calm and even. Make it slightly less than usual to suggest reduced hours before the termination. Then cease all future deposits from the payroll account we created. Ensure there is no digital trail leading back here. Anya nodded, her expression impassive, though a flicker of concern showed in her eyes. Madam, are you certain about this? Serafina's gaze was fixed on the city below. To build an empire, you must first test its foundations. My marriage is no different. She rehearsed the role she was about to play, channeling the genuine exhaustion she felt from her double life into the persona of a woman who had just been fired. She purposefully mussed her hair, smudged a bit of dirt on her cheek, and practiced a look of hollowed-out despair in the mirror. She felt a pang of deep, unsettling guilt. She was about to weaponize Liam's love and trust against him. It was a cold, cruel act, a CEO's ruthless tactic applied to a human heart. Yet the memory of Eleanor's sneering face and the whispers of her own doubt pushed her forward. This was a necessary pain, a surgical cut to remove a potential cancer before it could spread and destroy everything. When she arrived home that evening, the atmosphere in the apartment was predictably tense. Eleanor was on the sofa watching a garish television game show her commentary a running stream of complaints about their noisy neighbors and the poor quality of the broadcast signal. Liam was at the small kitchen table, a textbook on architectural history open before him, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was so engrossed that he didn't immediately notice her enter. This was the scene she had to shatter this fragile, imperfect bubble of domesticity. She closed the door softly behind her, the sound seeming to echo with a heavy finality. She stood in the entryway for a moment, letting the silence draw their attention. Liam looked up first, his face breaking into its usual warm smile, but it faltered when he saw her expression. "Sarah, what is it? What's wrong?" he asked, already pushing his chair back. Eleanor turned from the television, an annoyed look on her face. "Don't just stand there like a ghost. If you have bad news, spit it out. I can't take much more of it." Serafina took a deep, shaky breath, letting her shoulders slump in feigned defeat. She couldn't meet Liam's worried gaze, focusing instead on a crack in the linoleum floor. They had to make cutbacks. She mumbled, her voice quiet and strained. "Corporate restructuring," they said. "My route was eliminated. I lost my job." The silence that followed was broken by Eleanor's sharp, cruel laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor, filled only with vindictive triumph. "Fired, I knew it. I always said you were incompetent," she shrieked, getting to her feet. "Useless. You can't even hold down a simple delivery job. What are we going to do now? How will we pay the rent? How will we eat? You have finally done it. You have dragged my son down into the gutter with you." Her voice rose with each accusation, a torrent of verbal poison, designed to inflict maximum pain. She was a vulture who had been waiting for a sign of weakness, and now she was ready to feast. Serafina braced herself for Liam's reaction. She expected a flash of panic, a flicker of anger, or at the very least a wave of despair. She was prepared for his disappointment, for the inevitable stress that would now fall upon his shoulders. What she was not prepared for was his complete and utter silence toward his mother. He didn't even look at Eleanor. He moved past her as if she were a piece of furniture, his eyes fixed only on his wife. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and gently wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a firm, protective embrace. He held her for a long moment, simply letting her lean against him. "It's okay," he whispered into her hair, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Hey, look at me. It is not your fault. Do you hear me? You worked so hard. This is not on you." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were not filled with anger or fear, but with a deep, unwavering tenderness and a surprising, steely resolve. "It's just a job. We're a team. We will figure this out together." Then, without raising his voice, he spoke over his shoulder to his mother, his tone imbued with a quiet authority Serafina had never heard from him before. "Mother, be silent. Now is not the time." Eleanor was so shocked by his tone that she was momentarily stunned into silence. In that quiet, a profound shift occurred. The gentle, languid artist Serafina knew seemed to recede, replaced by a man of purpose. Liam led her to the sofa, sat her down, and then walked to the kitchen table. He closed his textbook, pushed it aside, and pulled out a clean notepad and a pen. He began to write his movements, calm and methodical. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to them. "Let's see where we are. Rent is due in 2 weeks. Utilities. Groceries." He wasn't panicking. He was strategizing. Serafina watched him, her feigned despair momentarily forgotten, replaced by a genuine, dizzying sense of shock. This was not the reaction of a freeloader. A freeloader would complain, would shift the blame, would wallow in self-pity. Liam was doing the opposite. He was taking immediate ownership of the problem. He was taking charge. A powerful, unexpected wave of love and admiration washed over her, so potent it almost made her confess everything on the spot. But it was followed by a sharp pang of guilt. This man, this good, strong man, was suffering because of her calculated game. He looked up from the notepad, his expression serious but calm. "It's going to be tight for a while," he admitted. "I'll start looking for work tomorrow morning." anything. I can wash dishes, work construction, stock shelves. It doesn't matter. I'll also see about selling some of my old drafting equipment. It might be worth a little. He was not just offering platitudes. He was creating a concrete plan of action, a survival strategy built on his own immediate sacrifice. He was ready to carry the entire burden on his own shoulders without a single word of complaint or blame. He came back to the sofa and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His were warm and strong. He looked directly into her eyes, and in their depths, she saw not the man his mother accused him of being, but the man she had first fallen in love with, only now with a core of strength she never knew he possessed. "Don't you worry about a thing, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but filled with an unbreakable conviction. "I've got you. I promise to take care of you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. I meant it. I'll always have you." In that moment, Serafina realized her cruel test might just reveal a man far more worthy than she had ever dared to imagine, and the thought was both thrilling and utterly terrifying. True to his word, Liam was up before the sun the next morning. The quiet, contemplative artist who would normally spend his mornings sketching in the soft light was gone. In his place was a man with a sharp, focused energy. Dressed in a simple, clean shirt and durable pants, he methodically went through the classifieds, circling potential leads with a red pen. He wasn't just looking for a career, he was hunting for survival. Serafina watched him from the doorway, a mug of coffee growing cold in her hands. The sight of his determined profile, etched with a gravity she had never seen before, was both a comfort and a dagger to her heart. This was her doing. This transformation from dreamer to provider was a direct consequence of her calculated deception. He didn't just rely on newspaper ads or online job boards. He hit the pavement, walking from one business to another with a quiet humility that belied the fierce determination in his eyes. He faced a dozen rejections before noon, each one a small, sharp blow to his pride. Yet he never faltered. He walked onto construction sites, asking foremen if they needed an extra hand for the day. He went into the back entrances of restaurants, asking managers if they needed a dishwasher for the evening shift. He was willing to do anything to take on any task, no matter how menial or physically demanding, to honor the promise he had made to his wife. By the end of the week, he had cobbled together a grueling existence. His days were spent under the harsh sun at a small construction site on the outskirts of the city. It was back-breaking work, hauling bags of cement, digging trenches, and learning the raw physical language of manual labor. He would come home covered in a layer of dust and grime, his muscles screaming in protest. After a quick shower and a hastily eaten meal, he would leave again, heading to a bustling downtown restaurant where he would spend the next 6 hours in the hot, steamy chaos of the kitchen, washing an endless mountain of dishes. The physical toll was immense. The languid grace of the artist was replaced by the weary, aching movements of an exhausted laborer. His soft hands, accustomed to the delicate pressure of a charcoal pencil, quickly became calloused and raw, marked with the small cuts and scrapes of his new life. He grew leaner, the lines of his face sharper, his eyes shadowed with a profound fatigue. Yet through it all, he never once complained. His first question upon returning home long after midnight was always for Sarah. "Did you eat? Are you okay?" His love was a steady, unwavering flame in the midst of their self-inflicted storm. Eleanor, however, saw his sacrifice not as a badge of honor, but as the ultimate symbol of their family's degradation. She weaponized his exhaustion, turning it into another tool for her emotional torture. "Look at the state of you," she would sneer as he collapsed into a chair. "My brilliant son reduced to a common ditch digger. All for her. She sits here all day doing nothing while you destroy your body. She is a parasite, Liam, and she is killing you." Her words were a constant corrosive acid intended to eat away at his resolve and turn him against his wife. But Liam's patience, worn thin by exhaustion, had no room for his mother's cruelty. One evening, after a particularly vicious tirade from Eleanor, he finally snapped. "Enough," he said, his voice quiet but resonating with a hard, dangerous edge. He stood up and faced his mother, his tired eyes blazing. "Every cut on my hands, every ache in my back is a testament to my love for my wife. It is a price I pay gladly to keep her safe and fed. This is what a husband does. This is what it means to be a man. It is a concept you will clearly never understand. So do not speak of her that way again." The sheer protective ferocity in his voice stunned Eleanor into a rare, sputtering silence. It was on the construction site that a clue to Liam's hidden depths emerged. The project foreman, a gruff but fair man named Sal, was in a bind. The architect's blueprints for a complex support arch were flawed. The load-bearing calculations were off a mistake that would compromise the entire structure. During a brief lunch break, Liam noticed Sal staring at the plans with a frustrated scowl. Hesitantly, Liam glanced over his shoulder. After a moment of study, he spoke. "The stress is distributed incorrectly," he said quietly. "If you shift this support column 6 inches to the west and use a flying buttress design here, you'll solve the load issue and actually use less material." He then picked up a piece of chalk and on a dusty concrete slab sketched a clean, elegant, and perfectly viable architectural solution. Sal stared from the sophisticated drawing back to the dirt-streaked face of his newest laborer, his mouth agape. "Where in the hell did you learn to do that?" he asked, bewildered. Liam simply shrugged, a faint blush on his cheeks as he wiped the chalk from his hands. "I just like to sketch buildings. It's a hobby." He quickly went back to his work, leaving the foreman staring at the drawing with a look of pure astonishment. The incident was a momentary ripple in a long, hard day, but it was a profound one. It was a glimpse of a brilliant mind hidden beneath the guise of a simple laborer. Serafina, consumed by a mixture of guilt and worry, had secretly visited the construction site that afternoon, watching her husband from the safety of her car, parked a block away. She saw the sweat on his brow, the strain in his back, as he lifted a heavy load. The sight was a physical pain in her own chest. Her test felt less like a strategic assessment and more like an act of pure cruelty. She was about to leave when she saw the exchange with the foreman watching through a pair of discreet binoculars. She couldn't hear their words, but she saw Liam draw on the concrete, saw the foreman's shocked reaction. A new dizzying question entered her mind. Who exactly was the man she had married? That night, as she gently cleaned a fresh cut on his hand with an antiseptic wipe, the conflict within her reached a fever pitch. He was so tired he could barely hold his head up, yet he managed a soft smile for her. "See," he whispered, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "We're doing okay. We're a team." She looked at his hands, calloused and bruised, so different from the artist's hands that had so gently sketched her face. Her heart both broke for his suffering and soared, with a love so deep and fierce it left her breathless. He had passed her test with more honor and strength than she could have ever imagined. She was in love not just with the gentle dreamer, but with the indomitable man of action he had become, and she knew with a terrible certainty that the test wasn't over yet. While Liam was fighting his battles in the trenches of manual labor, a different kind of war was being waged in the city's glass towers. Julian Croft, the formidable CEO of Croft Developments, stood before a digital model of his latest flagship project, a skyscraper designed to challenge the dominance of the Beaumont industry skyline. Croft was a man carved from ambition and predatory instinct. He saw business not as a collaboration but as a battlefield, and his chief rival, Serafina Beaumont, was a queen he was determined to checkmate. He was known for his aggressive expansion tactics and his uncanny ability to find and exploit his rival's weaknesses. The construction site where Liam toiled was a small subcontracted part of this massive undertaking. The foreman, Sal, still amazed by Liam's impromptu architectural fix, had mentioned the incident to the project supervisor. The story of a common laborer who could read and correct complex blueprints with the ease of a master architect was unusual enough to travel up the corporate ladder. It eventually landed in a field report on Julian Croft's desk. In a sea of data about concrete viscosity and union disputes, this small human interest anecdote snagged his attention. Croft didn't believe in coincidences or undiscovered geniuses. He believed in assets, and he had a feeling he just found a new one. Driven by a calculated curiosity, Croft decided to make an unannounced visit to the site, dressed in an impeccable suit that seemed to repel the dust and grime of the environment. He moved with an air of predatory grace. From a distance, he watched Liam work, noting the efficient, powerful movements and the unwavering focus. This was no lazy freeloader. This was a man of discipline. During the midday break, as Liam sat alone eating a simple sandwich, Croft approached him. His smile was disarming, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "You must be Liam Vance," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Julian Croft. I heard you saved my project manager a considerable amount of time and money the other day." Liam, surprised by the sudden appearance of the man whose name was on the side of the building, shook his hand hesitantly. "I just saw a problem and a possible solution," he said, his tone humble and direct. Croft's smile widened. He was an expert reader of men, and he saw no artifice in Liam, only a quiet, untapped intelligence. "That's a rare skill," Croft purred. A man with a mind like yours shouldn't be hauling cement. He should be building with it. He then laid his trap, baiting it with the one thing he knew. Liam desperately needed hope. I have an opening in my design department, Croft continued, his gaze sharp and assessing. It's a junior draftsman position, a chance to learn from the best in the business. The pay is substantial, the work is challenging, and it comes with a future. A man like you deserves a career, not just a job. The offer was a stunning, blinding flash of light in the darkness of Liam's current reality. It was everything he was working for, a way to provide for Sarah, to give her a better life, to finally get his hands clean and his mind engaged. It was a lifeline thrown from a golden yacht, yet Liam did not immediately grasp it. His loyalty was his core, and his first thought was of his wife. Mr. Croft, that's an incredibly generous offer, he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. But I couldn't possibly accept without discussing it with my wife first. We make these decisions together. This response intrigued Croft. The man had honor, which made him both more valuable and potentially more difficult to control. Of course, Croft said smoothly, handing him a sleek black business card. A family man. I respect that. Talk it over with her. My offer stands. That evening, Liam presented the offer to Sarah. He was practically vibrating with a nervous, hopeful energy. Can you believe it, Sarah? A real job in office. I could finally take care of you properly. As Serafina took the business card, her blood ran cold. The name engraved in silver foil was that of her most dangerous rival. She knew Julian Croft. He was a shark who never offered a gift that wasn't also a hook. He had somehow found Liam, and now he was trying to sink his teeth into the soft underbelly of her life. This was no coincidence. It was an attack. Before she could voice her grave concerns to warn him of the viper he was dealing with, Eleanor swept into the room, having overheard the entire conversation from the hallway. For her, the name Julian Croft was not a threat. It was a miracle. It was the universe finally recognizing her son's genius and sending a powerful benefactor to rescue him from his squalid life. Her eyes gleamed with a fanatical light. Julian Croft. The Julian Croft. Oh, my boy. This is it. This is the beginning of everything. Your talent is finally being recognized, she gushed, snatching the card from Serafina's hand as if it were a holy relic. While Liam tried to temper his mother's explosive excitement, Eleanor's mind was already racing, formulating a plan. This was her chance to finally get everything she wanted, wealth, status, and most importantly, the removal of the one obstacle in her son's path. The next day, using the number from the business card, she made a private, audacious phone call. She was put through to Croft almost immediately, his curiosity piqued by the caller's identity. With a tone of conspiratorial intimacy, Eleanor laid out her proposition. Mr. Croft, she began, you have seen my son's potential, but he is shackled. His wife, she has no ambition, no connections. She is an anchor tied to his leg. She took a deep breath and delivered the final treacherous blow. He is too loyal to leave her even for his own good. But if he had a powerful reason to, if he knew a brilliant future was absolutely guaranteed for him, perhaps he could be persuaded. I can help with that persuasion. I can remove the anchor. Julian Croft, listening on the other end of the line, felt a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. It was better than he could have hoped. He had not just found a potential pawn in Liam, he had found a willing, eager traitor in the man's own mother. The opportunity to sow chaos in Serafina Beaumont's personal life was a strategic advantage he could not pass up. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice a purr of encouragement. Tell me more. The unholy alliance was forged. On one end of the line was a mother willing to sacrifice her son's happiness for her own greed, and on the other, a corporate predator who would happily burn a family to the ground to gain an edge on his rival. Armed with the tacit endorsement of a man like Julian Croft, Eleanor Vance transformed. The bitter, complaining woman became a creature of singular, venomous purpose. She now saw herself not as a victim of circumstance, but as a kingmaker, the architect of her son's glorious future. Her co-conspirator Croft played his part with masterful subtlety. He sent a small, elegantly packaged gift to their apartment, not for Liam, but for Eleanor. It was a rare, expensive orchid and a simple handwritten note for a woman of taste and foresight. JC. It was a small gesture, but its message was clear. He was acknowledging her as an ally, a partner in their shared enterprise. The orchids sat on their small coffee table like a beautiful poisonous toadstool, a symbol of the corruption that had taken root in their home. Eleanor began her campaign immediately, her tactics escalating from passive-aggressive comments to a full-blown psychological assault. She treated the potential job with Croft not as an opportunity, but as a foregone conclusion, a destiny that was being foolishly delayed. "Have you called Mr. Croft yet, Liam?" she would ask a dozen times a day. "A man like that doesn't wait forever. He is offering you a kingdom, and you are hesitating for the sake of a peasant." She would then turn her venom on Sarah, her voice dripping with scorn. "She is holding you back. She is afraid. She knows that if you become successful, you will see her for what she truly is, a millstone around your neck." Serafina played her part with the skill of a seasoned actress. She feigned fear and insecurity, her eyes downcast, her posture slumped. "But we're happy, aren't we, Liam?" she would whisper, allowing a tremor of manufactured panic to enter her voice. "Your art is what matters, not some corporate job. We don't need fancy things." Inside, she was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Each word from Eleanor was a turn of the screw tightening the pressure on Liam and on her own heart. She watched Liam searching his face for any sign of wavering, any flicker of resentment toward her. But he remained a steadfast wall of support, constantly reassuring her, defending her against his mother's attacks. "My art will still be here, Sarah," he would say gently. "My first priority is you." The breaking point came a week after Croft's initial offer. Eleanor, emboldened by another subtle communication from Croft, and fed up with what she saw as Liam's sentimental weakness, decided it was time for the final decisive move. She chose a moment when all three of them were in the small living room. The air was already thick with unspoken tension. She stood before Liam, her back ramrod straight, her expression one of grave theatrical solemnity. "Liam, my son," she began, her voice quivering with false emotion. "Everything I have ever done has been for you. To see your potential squandered, your life wasted, it breaks my heart." She then placed a thick, official-looking envelope on the table in front of him. Serafina recognized it instantly. It was a set of divorce papers. Her heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This was it. The final act of her cruel play was about to unfold. "Mr. Croft agrees with me," Eleanor continued, her voice hardening. "He sees your genius, but he cannot invest in a man who is not serious about his own future. He cannot hitch his star to a man who is shackled to a past of poverty and failure." She gestured toward the envelope. "This is your choice. A clean break. A new beginning." She then turned her gaze on Serafina, her eyes cold and merciless. "And you," she hissed, "if you truly love him, you will let him go. You will sign these papers and disappear. It is the only decent thing you can do for him." The sheer audacity of the demand was breathtaking. Serafina lowered her head, hiding the flash of cold fury in her eyes, forcing tears of feigned heartbreak to well up. She looked at Liam, her expression a perfect mask of a terrified, pleading wife. "Liam," she whispered, her voice breaking. It was a masterful performance, but beneath the facade, her entire world hung suspended on his answer. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of 2 years of lies, of sacrifice, of doubt. Liam stared at the papers on the table, his face unreadable. For a long, agonizing moment, he was silent. Eleanor watched him, a triumphant smirk beginning to form on her lips. She believed she had won. She believed that the combined lure of wealth and her maternal guilt-tripping would be irresistible. Serafina held her breath, the sound of her own heartbeat, a deafening drum in her ears. Had she underestimated the appeal of an easy life? Had she misjudged the man she loved so completely? Was this where her carefully constructed world came crashing down, proving her to be the ultimate fool? Then slowly, deliberately, Liam reached for the envelope. He didn't open it. He held it in his hands, feeling its weight. He looked at his mother, and for the first time there was no anger in his eyes, no frustration. There was only a deep, profound pity. "You have never understood, have you?" he said, his voice quiet, almost conversational. "You see success in dollars and titles. You see value in what a person can give you. I was raised in this house, but I have learned nothing from you." He then turned his gaze to Sarah, and the love that shone from his eyes was so powerful, so absolute, it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. "My wife is my home," he said, his voice resonating with an unbreakable conviction. "She is my partner. She is my entire world. The life we have now, the struggles we face them together. That is not a shackle, Mother. That is a privilege. He then took the divorce papers and with a single decisive motion, he ripped the thick envelope in half and then in half again. The sound of the tearing paper was the only sound in the silent room. He let the pieces flutter from his hands onto the floor, a definitive, unequivocal rejection of his mother's entire worldview. He walked over to where Sarah was sitting, knelt before her, and took her trembling hands in his. "I choose you," he said, his voice for her alone. "In this life and every life after, I choose us." Serafina looked into his eyes, and the tears that now streamed down her face were no longer part of an act. They were real tears of overwhelming relief, of profound soul-shaking love, and of the deepest, most agonizing guilt she had ever known. He had passed her test. He had proven his love to be more pure and more powerful than she had ever imagined. And in doing so, he had exposed the true ugliness of her own deception. The ripped pieces of the divorce papers lay on the floor like fallen leaves, a stark white testament to Liam's unbreakable vow. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ragged rasp of Eleanor's breathing. Her face, a moment before alight with triumphant expectation, had gone slack with disbelief. The gears of her mind seemed to grind to a halt, unable to process this utter rejection of her perfectly laid plan. This was not just a disagreement, it was a mutiny. The son she had tried to mold, to manipulate, to sell to the highest bidder, had just declared his independence in the most absolute way possible. The disbelief curdled, then boiled over into a volcanic eruption of pure, unrestrained rage. "Fool!" she shrieked the word, tearing from her throat, raw and ugly. "You sentimental blind fool, do you have any idea what you've just done? You've thrown away a fortune, you've thrown away your future." Her tirade was now directed solely at Liam, her voice climbing in pitch and volume with every word. "He was offering you the world and you spit in his face. For what? For her." She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Serafina. "For this barren, worthless woman who brings nothing but poverty and filth into my home. She will be the death of you, and I will have to watch as you both starve." When her venomous words failed to provoke a reaction from Liam, who stood like a stone bulwark before his wife, Eleanor's fury sought a new physical target. She lunged toward Serafina, her hands curled into claws, her face a contorted mask of hatred. "This is all your fault," she screamed. But before she could reach her, Liam moved with a speed that belied his gentle nature. He stepped directly into his mother's path, blocking her advance. He didn't touch her, but his presence was an impassable barrier. "Do not," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "touch my wife." The cold, quiet finality in his tone was more intimidating than any shout could have ever been. This final act of defiance, this ultimate choosing of his wife over his mother, pushed Eleanor completely over the edge of sanity. Her son's rejection was a wound she could not bear, so she lashed out at the only person left to blame. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "This is my house, paid for by my late husband. I will not have a useless piece of trash like you under its roof for one more second." She then acted on her threat. She stormed into the small bedroom that Liam and Serafina shared, a whirlwind of destructive energy. She ripped open the closet and drawers, grabbing handfuls of Sarah's meager belongings. It was an act of profound theatrical cruelty. She took the few simple dresses and blouses. Serafina owned the worn-out work uniform, a small treasured book of poetry, and a single framed photograph of Liam and Sarah on their wedding day. She carried the armful of items to the front door and with a final guttural scream of rage, threw them out into the dimly lit public hallway. The clothes and the books scattered across the dirty linoleum, and the framed photo hit the opposite wall with a sickening crack of glass. There she shrieked, her chest heaving. "Go and die in the gutter where you belong. You are nothing, you have nothing, get out." Liam watched this final unforgivable violation, and something inside him died. The last embers of filial duty, of love for the mother he once knew, were extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, hard ash of her betrayal. He didn't rage, he didn't argue. His face was a mask of calm, sorrowful finality. He turned to Serafina, who was playing the part of a devastated victim, tears streaming down her face. He gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "She's right about one thing," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This isn't our home anymore." Ignoring his mother's continued incoherent screaming, he walked past her into the bedroom. He took a single canvas duffel bag and quickly packed his own essentials, a few changes of clothes, his toiletries, and his precious sketchbook. He then walked out into the hallway and with a quiet, heartbreaking dignity, began to pick up Serafina's scattered belongings. He tenderly rescued the book of poetry, gently brushing the dust from its cover. He carefully folded each piece of her clothing. He picked up the broken picture frame, his fingers tracing the crack in the glass over their smiling faces, before carefully placing everything into his bag. It was an act of profound love and respect in the face of ultimate disrespect. With Serafina's hand held firmly in his, he walked to the door. He paused on the threshold and looked back at his mother, who now stood panting and wild-eyed in the middle of the living room. "I want you to understand something," he said, his voice clear and steady. "You didn't just throw her out, Mother. You threw away your son. I hope your greed and your ambition are enough to keep you company. They are all you have left." He then pulled the door closed behind them, the soft click of the latch severing the final tie to his past. They stood together on the street corner, the city lights painting the night sky an artificial orange. They had nothing but a single bag and the clothes on their backs. They were, for all intents and purposes, homeless. Serafina, her role as victim finally over, looked up at her husband's face, expecting to see fear or regret or the dawning horror of their situation. Instead, she was stunned to see a look of serene, unburdened peace. He looked down at her, his eyes clear and calm in the lamplight, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "Well," he said, squeezing her hand, "at least we're free." For Serafina, the test was over, her victory absolute. Her husband was a king, even when he had nothing. And she knew with a thrill that was both terrifying and exhilarating that it was her turn to show him he had everything. The city street, moments before a stage for their familial drama, now felt like a desolate alien landscape. They were an island of two in a sea of indifferent traffic and flickering neon signs, a single duffel bag containing the entirety of their shared physical world. Yet in Liam's eyes, Serafina saw no trace of despair. The fury and pain he had shown his mother had been replaced by a serene, almost buoyant calm. He looked at their meager belongings, then at her, and a genuine smile touched his lips. "Freedom," he said, the word tasting sweet. "No more walking on eggshells, no more biting my tongue. It's just you and me now, Sarah. We'll find a cheap motel for the night, and I'll have 3 jobs by the end of the week. We can do this." His resilience was a thing of beauty, a testament to the man he had proven himself to be. He was already planning, already looking forward, his first and only instinct to protect and provide for her. It was in that moment that Serafina knew with absolute certainty that the test was over. The verdict was in, and he had passed with more honor than she had ever thought possible. A profound shift occurred within her. The weary, frightened persona of Sarah, the role she had inhabited for 2 long years, began to dissolve, slouging off like a snake's skin. Her posture straightened. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a familiar, quiet confidence. The queen was reclaiming her throne. "Liam," she said, her voice steady and clear, lacking the manufactured tremor he was used to. "You don't need to find a motel. And you won't need 3 jobs." He looked at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, at her sudden change in demeanor. He likely attributed it to the shock of the evening's events. She offered him a small, enigmatic smile. "Just wait here for 1 moment. I need to make a phone call. I think I know someone who can help us." She turned away slightly, pulling out the simple prepaid phone she used as part of her disguise. Liam watched her, a knot of concern tightening in his chest. Who could she possibly call at this hour? He hoped she wasn't so desperate as to call some shady acquaintance from her past for a loan. She punched in a single number. The call was answered before the first ring had finished. Serafina's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it was imbued with an unmistakable and absolute authority. It was a voice that did not request, but commanded. "Anya," she said, "it's done. Bring the car. And the rest of the escort. My current location. You have 5 minutes." She ended the call without waiting for a reply. She turned back to Liam, her expression calm. "Help is on the way." Liam's confusion deepened into a tangible worry. Car escort. The words were jarringly out of place, hints of a world far more complex and dangerous than the simple one he thought they shared. Exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds later, a low, powerful rumble turned the heads of the few pedestrians on the street. From around the corner, a vehicle emerged that did not belong in this world of cracked pavement and struggling storefronts. It was a custom-built Beaumont Sovereign limousine, a silent black phantom of polished steel and tinted glass. Its immense length seemed to warp the very dimensions of the dingy street. Behind it, 3 matching black SUVs, their presence menacing and official, glided into formation, their headlights cutting through the urban gloom. The motorcade came to a perfect, synchronized stop directly in front of the stunned couple. The rear door of the limousine opened with a silent electric hiss. A woman in a sharply tailored, elegant dark suit stepped out. She was the picture of corporate power and efficiency. She walked with purpose across the pavement, her expensive heels clicking softly. Her path took her directly to Serafina. Ignoring Liam completely, she bowed her head in a gesture of profound respect. "Madame Beaumont, Anya," said her voice crisp and professional. "It is good to see you. We've taken the liberty of preparing your presidential suite at the Grand Elysian. Your security detail is in place." The world seemed to tilt and spin around Liam. Madame Beaumont. The name struck him like a physical blow. Beaumont. As in Beaumont Industries, the colossal corporation whose logo was on half the buildings in the city. He stared speechless at the impeccably dressed woman, then at the fleet of armored vehicles, and finally his gaze landed on his wife. He was looking at Sarah, the woman in the worn-out pants and faded polo shirt, the woman whose hands he had held as she cried, the woman he had just vowed to protect with his own sweat and blood. But the name he heard was that of a legend, an untouchable titan of industry. The two realities were impossible to reconcile, and his mind buckled under the strain. From the second-floor window of the apartment, Eleanor had been watching the scene unfold, her heart filled with a spiteful glee. She had been savoring the sight of her son and his worthless wife homeless on the street. Then she saw the cars. Her smug expression froze, then melted into a slack-jawed confusion. She watched as the elegant woman in the suit emerged and bowed to her daughter-in-law. She heard the name faintly through the open window, Madame Beaumont. The name echoed in the silent, empty apartment, a death knell for her greed. A wave of icy, nauseating realization washed over her. The pauper she had tormented, the trash she had thrown out, was a queen. The full catastrophic weight of her mistake crashed down upon her, and her legs gave way, sending her collapsing to the floor in a heap of pure, unadulterated horror. On the street, Serafina's transformation was complete. She was no longer hiding. She stood tall, radiating the calm, unshakable authority that was her birthright. She turned to Liam, her eyes softening as she saw the utter shock on his face. "Liam," she said, her voice gentle but firm, a bridge between the two worlds. "Please, get in the car. I promise I will explain absolutely everything." A chauffeur, uniformed and silent, held the limousine door open. Numbly, as if in a dream, Liam allowed himself to be guided inside, sinking into the impossibly soft leather of the opulent interior. The door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, sealing them in a world of silent, climate-controlled luxury. As the limousine pulled away from the curb, with the silent, powerful grace of an ocean liner, it left behind the street, the apartment, and the entire life of lies they had built. Liam stared at the woman beside him. She was still dressed in the clothes of Sarah, the courier, the woman he had sacrificed everything for. But in her eyes, he now saw the power, the intelligence, and the unnerving confidence of Serafina Beaumont, a complete and powerful stranger. He had chosen to be homeless with his wife, and had instead found himself trapped in a gilded cage with a queen. The journey from the gritty curb of their old street to the penthouse suite of the Grand Elysian Hotel took place in a profound, vibrating silence. The limousine moved with an impossible smoothness, insulating them from the city they had just been a part of. Serafina sat across from Liam, the vast, opulent space between them feeling more like a chasm than a luxury. She watched him as he stared out the tinted window, his reflection, a ghostly image superimposed over the blur of city lights. He was not looking at the expensive storefronts or the symbols of wealth they passed. He was looking at a world that was suddenly alien to him, trying to reconcile the life he knew with the impossible truth he now faced. She braced herself for the inevitable storm of his anger and betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the sharp edge of a shard of glass. He didn't look at her. He kept his gaze fixed on the window. Was any of it real? He asked the question, so quiet it was almost lost in the hum of the engine. The worry when the rent was due, the cheap instant coffee because we couldn't afford beans, the nights we'd count loose change to see if we could afford a pizza. He finally turned to face her, and his eyes were not filled with anger, but with a deep, bottomless well of hurt. Was our life the one I was fighting for? Just a game to you, Serafina? The use of her real name was a jolt. The question pierced through her carefully constructed defenses, striking directly at the heart of her guilt. She didn't offer excuses. He deserved the unvarnished, ugly truth. "The feelings were real," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. "My love for you was real, but the circumstances, they were a lie." She began to explain, her words tumbling out in a torrent of long overdue confession. She told him about her grandfather's sudden death, The crushing weight of the empire that had fallen on her shoulders overnight, and the paralyzing fear that this immense, obscene wealth would poison the one pure thing she had ever known, their love. I met you as Sarah, the simple girl. And you loved her, she continued, her voice cracking with the emotion she had suppressed for so long. When I became Serafina Beaumont, the CEO, I was terrified that you would start to see me differently, that our love would become transactional. So I hid. I built this elaborate, insane test. She finally met his gaze, her own eyes pleading for understanding. I wasn't testing to see if you were a freeloader, Liam. I was testing to see if what we had was strong enough to survive who I really am. It was selfish, and it was a coward's way out. I was so afraid of losing you that I deceived you instead. Their arrival at the Grand Elysian punctuated her confession. They were whisked through a private elevator to the presidential suite, a breathtaking expanse of glass, marble, and art that occupied the entire top floor. The view of the city skyline, the same one from her office, was now their temporary wallpaper. Anya was waiting for them, along with a rack of clothes and a quiet, efficient hotel staff. The contrast was brutal. Moments ago, they had been homeless. Now they stood in a palace, a silent testament to the scale of Serafina's lie. Anya presented her with a simple but exquisitely tailored silk dress. The act of changing out of the worn-out courier uniform felt like a final symbolic shedding of her false identity. She stood before Liam, no longer Sarah the pauper, but not quite the iron-fisted CEO either. She was just Serafina, vulnerable and exposed. She finished her story, leaving no detail out, no matter how it condemned her. She took full responsibility for the pain she had caused him, for the humiliation he had endured from his mother, for the physical toll the menial jobs had taken on him. You passed a test you never should have been given, she finished, her voice thick with shame. You proved you are a better person than I am, Liam, and I am so, so sorry. She stood before him, awaiting his judgment, fully expecting him to walk away. Liam listened to her entire confession without interruption, his expression a mask of quiet contemplation. When she was done, a long silence stretched between them. He walked to the vast window, looking down at the city lights far below. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment. He would rightfully condemn her, and their story would end here in this beautiful, sterile cage. Instead, a sound she didn't expect filled the room. A soft, sad chuckle. He turned from the window, and a slow, knowing smile touched his lips. You really are an incredible strategist, Serafina, he said. Ruthless, thorough. But you made one critical error in your calculations. He took a step toward her. You weren't the only one with a secret. Serafina stared at him, bewildered. What are you talking about? He smiled again, a hint of the gentle teasing Liam she knew returning to his eyes. My turn to confess. I am not just an aspiring artist who can't sell his work. A few years ago, I was a rather successful architect working under the pseudonym L.M. Vance. I won a few awards, made a name for myself. But I grew to hate that world. The greed, the backstabbing, the soulless corporate clients. Men like your friend Julian Croft. It was poison. So I walked away. I wanted a simple life, an authentic life. And then I met a simple, authentic, wonderful courier named Sarah. He paused, letting the first part of his revelation sink in before delivering the final devastating blow. I've known who you are for over a year now. The floor seemed to drop out from under Serafina. What she breathed. How? He shrugged. It was a stupid mistake. You were talking in your sleep one night, something about a hostile takeover of the Argent Group. It sounded odd for a courier. I Googled the phrase the next day. The first result was a business article about Beaumont Industries with a picture of its brilliant, reclusive CEO, Serafina Beaumont. He looked at her, his expression softening. You had your mother's eyes. And your grandfather's jawline. It wasn't hard to put together after that. You knew, she whispered, her mind reeling. This whole time, the job's my mother? You knew it was all a test. He nodded. At first I was hurt, deeply. But then I understood your fear. And I realized you weren't the only one testing things. You were testing my character. I decided to test your heart. I wanted to see how long the powerful Serafina Beaumont could endure a life of poverty for the man she claimed to love. I wanted to know if you would break and reveal yourself, or if your love for us was stronger than your comfort. In a way, we were both running the same experiment, just from opposite sides of the glass. The revelation was seismic. It shifted the entire foundation of their relationship of her 2-year-long deception. She hadn't been a queen testing a pauper. They had been two sovereigns in disguise, each testing the heart of the other. The guilt that had consumed her was suddenly replaced by a profound, dizzying sense of being truly seen, of being matched. He hadn't just loved her in spite of her lies. He had loved her through them understanding the fear that motivated them. All the lies, all the pain had paradoxically led them to a place of absolute, unshakable truth. She looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time, not as her project or her test subject, but as her equal, her partner. The game was over, and they had both won. The morning sun that streamed into the presidential suite illuminated a world transformed. The oppressive tension of the previous weeks had evaporated, replaced by a light, breathable atmosphere of profound intimacy and relief. The secrets that had acted as a wall between them were gone, and in their place a new exhilarating partnership was blooming. Serafina, dressed in elegant silk pajamas, commanded a global conference call from a plush armchair. Her voice, the calm, decisive instrument of power she had hidden for so long. Across the room, Liam was not just idly sketching. He was poring over architectural journals, his mind visibly alight with ideas, a forgotten passion rekindled. They would catch each other's eye across the vast suite and share a small, secret smile, the silent communication of two people who had finally truly found each other. The weight of their shared deception had not vanished, but it had changed into a foundation for a new playful honesty. You know, for a woman who was supposedly devastated about losing her job, you recovered remarkably quickly. Liam teased, his eyes twinkling as he recalled her performance. Serafina laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound. And for a freeloader who was supposed to be a drain on society, you seemed remarkably adept at architectural engineering. The banter was their way of healing, of acknowledging the absurdity and pain of their tests, while cementing the truth they had discovered. Their mutual respect was as unshakable as their love. This newfound peace was interrupted by the arrival of Anya, whose brisk professional demeanor signaled that the outside world was once again intruding. She carried a tablet displaying a flurry of red-tinted stock charts and alarming news headlines. "Madam, he's made his move," Anya said, her voice tight with urgency. "Julian Croft has initiated a hostile takeover bid for Beaumont Legacy Holdings." The name of the subsidiary sent a chill down Serafina's spine. It wasn't their largest or most profitable division, but it was the company her grandfather had started, the heart and soul of the entire Beaumont empire. The attack was as vicious as it was brilliant. Croft was waging a two-front war. On the financial front, he was using offshore funds to aggressively buy up stock, driving the price up to create a bubble he could then threaten to pop, causing panic among smaller investors. On the public relations front, he was leaking carefully crafted, anonymous insider stories to the financial press, hinting at instability within the Beaumont family, questioning Serafina's leadership, and suggesting a looming corporate collapse. He was using the very chaos Eleanor had created as a weapon against her. "The board is in a panic," Anya concluded. "They're pushing for an emergency meeting. They think you should sell." In the past, Serafina would have retreated into herself, a solitary general, planning her defense. Now she was not alone. She looked at Liam, who had been listening intently, his expression serious. "Anya, bring up the full portfolio on Croft developments and the attack vectors," she commanded. The suite's main wall shimmered to life, displaying a holographic web of complex data. Serafina turned to her husband. "You know how men like him think. You walked away from their world. What do you see?" It was a profound gesture of trust, an admission that his perspective was as valuable as her own. Liam stepped toward the holographic display, studying it not as a collection of financial data, but as a structure, a design. He was an architect, again analyzing a building for its weaknesses. After a long moment, he pointed to the name of the subsidiary. "He's not attacking your wallet, Serafina. He's attacking your heart," he said, his insight cutting through the noise of the data. "Why Legacy Holdings? It's not your most valuable asset in terms of pure numbers, but it's your grandfather's company. It's your history. He got that from my mother. He knows you value family and legacy. He's not trying to buy a company. He's trying to break your spirit. It's a psychological attack, not a financial one." His analysis was a flash of lightning illuminating the entire battlefield in a new terrifying light. She had been preparing for a corporate battle, but Croft was waging a personal war. Her board's conventional, panic-driven responses would be useless against such a strategy. She needed a new plan, an architect's plan. A partnership was forged in that moment, a fusion of two brilliant minds. Serafina possessed the corporate power and the ruthless understanding of the market. Liam possessed the creative, unconventional mind of a strategist who saw the hidden structures beneath the surface. They began to work their energies perfectly synchronized. He would pace before the display, sketching ideas in the air. He expects you to defend the walls to pour money into propping up the stock, Liam theorized. That's a siege defense. It's draining. Don't defend, counterattack. But not where he's expecting. He began to outline a daring, almost insane strategy, one that involved feigning weakness in one area, while launching a surgical strike against Croft's own most vulnerable, emotionally significant project. She listened, her mind translating his abstract architectural concepts into concrete, actionable corporate maneuvers. They finished each other's sentences, his creativity sparking her pragmatism, her power, giving his ideas teeth. In the midst of their strategic planning, the outside world tried one last time to intrude. Anya quietly reported that Eleanor had been calling the hotel, incessantly weeping, apologizing, and begging to speak to her son. Liam's face hardened, but not with anger. It was the calm, sad resolve of a concluded matter. He looked at Anya. "Please make arrangements for my mother," he said, his voice even. "Find her a place in the finest retirement community, somewhere quiet and comfortable, a long way from the city. See to it that all her expenses are covered for the rest of her life. But I will not be seeing her, and she is not to contact us again." He was providing for her as a son, but cutting her off as a mother. The door to that chapter of his life was now closed. With that final piece of their past dealt with, they turned their full attention to the future and to the battle that lay before them. They stood together before the vast window, the city sprawling beneath them, a kingdom they would now defend as one. The fear and uncertainty were gone, replaced by a thrilling, unified sense of purpose. Serafina took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "Ready to show Julian Croft what a shipper and a freeloader can do?" she asked, a dangerous, brilliant smile playing on her lips. He smiled back, his eyes alight with the fire she had fallen in love with. "He's about to learn," Liam said, "that he didn't just pick a fight with the CEO of Beaumont Industries. He picked a fight with us." The emergency board meeting at Beaumont Industries was a symphony of controlled panic. Gray-haired men, titans of industry in their own right, paced the floor, their faces etched with anxiety. Julian Croft's assault had been relentless, and their defenses were beginning to show cracks. The consensus in the room was clear-cut: their losses, sell the subsidiary, and appease the shark before he came for the whole ship. They all turned as Serafina entered, expecting to see a leader rattled by the crisis. Instead, they found a queen made of ice and fire, her composure so absolute it was unnerving. She took her seat at the head of the table, her gaze sweeping over the panicked faces before her. "Your recommendations have been noted," she said, her voice calm and cutting, instantly silencing the nervous chatter. "You advise retreat. You advise surrender." She let the words hang in the air, a quiet indictment of their fear. "I, however, have a different strategy." She laid out the audacious counteroffensive she and Liam had devised. It was a plan of such high risk and unconventional thinking that it was met with stunned silence, followed by a wave of protests. "It's too reckless," one board member exclaimed. "It could bankrupt us if it fails." Serafina simply held up a hand. "Julian Croft is waging a war against my family's legacy. He expects me to fight by the established rules of corporate warfare. I will not. This is not a negotiation. It is my command." The counterattack was a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. While Croft and the rest of the market were watching the stock price of Beaumont Legacy Holdings expecting Serafina to pour billions into a defensive buyback, she did the exact opposite. She allowed the stock to dip, creating the illusion of weakness. Instead, her capital was deployed like a hidden army, launching a devastating and completely unexpected assault on Croft's most critical supplier, a publicly traded tech firm that manufactured the specialized smart glass for his flagship skyscraper. She acquired a controlling interest in the company in a single morning of aggressive trading. The first Croft knew of it was when he received a notification that his primary supply contract had been indefinitely suspended by its new owner, Serafina Beaumont. Simultaneously, the second front of their war opened up. An anonymous, brilliantly written architectural critique was published online, penned by the revered but mysterious architectural theorist Vance. The article systematically dismantled the design of Croft's prized skyscraper, exposing critical, expensive flaws in its structural engineering and facade design flaws that would lead to catastrophic cost overruns and safety concerns. The critique went viral, and Croft's project, once a symbol of his vision, became a public laughingstock in the development community. His investors grew nervous, and the project's funding was suddenly in jeopardy. Croft was blindsided, caught in a pincer movement he never saw coming. His own empire was now under siege, his resources stretched thin as he scrambled to deal with a supply chain crisis and a collapse in investor confidence. Panicked and desperate, he did exactly what Liam predicted he would. Brady cheated. In an attempt to recoup his losses and fund his failing takeover, he began to illegally manipulate the market, using insider information from a mole within Beaumont Industries to short sell a stock he believed was about to plummet. It was the final piece of the trap Serafina and Liam had laid for him. The insider information was a fiction carefully fed to the mole by Anya. The targeted subsidiary was not failing. It was on the verge of a breakthrough. The moment Croft had committed to his massive illegal short position, Serafina held a press conference. She announced that the subsidiary had just secured a revolutionary new patent that would redefine the industry. The market exploded. The stock didn't just climb, it skyrocketed. Croft's short position was annihilated. The resulting financial hemorrhage was catastrophic, a wound from which Croft Developments would never recover. The final move was to deliver the meticulously gathered evidence of Croft's illegal market manipulation to the Securities Commission. Justice was swift and merciless. News channels broadcasted the stunning images of a pale, defeated Julian Croft being escorted from his gleaming office tower by federal agents. His empire, built on arrogance and theft, had crumbled to dust in a matter of days. In a quiet, luxurious room in a distant retirement community, Eleanor Vance watched the same news report on a large, flat-screen television. The report celebrated Serafina Beaumont's brilliant victory and lauded the contribution of her husband, the reclusive architectural genius, L.M. Vance, who was now joining Beaumont Industries as the head of a new design and innovation division. Eleanor stared at the screen, the full, bitter weight of what she had thrown away, crushing the very air from her lungs. She was surrounded by wealth and comfort, a gilded cage she had chosen over her own son, and she had never been more alone. Weeks later, far from any boardroom or television screen, Serafina and Liam stood on a dusty plot of land overlooking the city. Spread out on the hood of a simple truck was not a corporate report, but a blueprint. It was the design for the first project of the Beaumont Vance Foundation, a beautifully and intelligently designed community of affordable housing. He, the architect, pointed out a design feature. She, the CEO, discussed the logistics of sourcing sustainable materials. They were not playing roles anymore. He was not a freeloader, and she was not a shipper. They were simply Liam and Serafina partners, building something real and lasting together. He put an arm around her, and they looked out at the city, at the skyline. They now had a hand in shaping both literally and figuratively. They had been tested by lies, by greed, and by their own fears, and had emerged into a new, authentic reality. Their love was no longer a question to be answered, but a foundation upon which they could build anything. They had found in each other a perfect symbiotic strength, a partnership forged not in fire but in the unbreakable crucible of truth.